All right. So for today, we have the wonderful Bree Clemens. She is a technology leader with over 8 years of experience driving revenue growth across high growth SaaS companies. And she has tons of expertise, mainly in sales enablement, across revenue operations, and customer success. If you are not already connected with her, I highly recommend you connect with her. I'm dropping her LinkedIn right in the chat there. Bree, over to you, my friend.
Thanks so much, Michelle, and happy to be here, everybody. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. And if everybody can let me know when they can see that. Good to go. Perfect. Well, just a little bit more about me. I like to make these personal since we're all human at the end of the day. So I have a 2-year-old daughter. She just started potty training, so that's been a really fun adventure. I have a Shih Tzu toy poodle. He's a little white fluff ball, and his name is Winston. And then I'm also a certified yoga instructor, and I've been practicing and teaching for more than 10 years. So I like to bring empathy and understanding into my conversations, personally, but also professionally. So thank you everybody for being here today. I'm really excited to talk to you about what I call the Trust Accelerator. So currently I'm overseeing a technical support team working with our customer success and our customers really closely. And one of the initial challenges that I was faced with when I started working with the technical support team was how to build trust and how to build that really quickly. So just to kick off with a brief story and a little bit more context before we get into the meat of what we'll cover today, I inherited a team that was broken. The first call that I had joined, people were shouting at each other. It was not a good environment. And our customers felt that. And our customers actually stopped submitting support tickets because they didn't think we were actually going to fix their issue and started to ignore our team. So needless to say, it was not a good environment that I had walked into, and there was a lot of opportunity to make positive improvements and development and growth for the team. So fast forward a few years later, we now have customers touting our support team. We have customers continuing to invest millions of dollars with our solutions that are AI based. And the team loves working together. No one's shouting at each other anymore. And they actually like to hang out outside of work, which is really fun to see the evolution of the team change. So what does all of this mean to you? Really, at the end of the day, when we're thinking about a customer experience, we want to make sure everybody's fully engaged. So just a stat from Gallup, a fully engaged customer results in a 23% more profit, revenue, and growth potential compared to the average customer. So a customer is actually truly engaged with your solution and they're leveraging it and maximizing it to its potential, they're more likely to continue to invest money. And that should be a no-brainer. So a lot of times when we think about support, if you've ever worked in a technical support team, you can imagine like the SpongeBob GIF that I have up. There's a lot of reactivity that's happening, right? So people are running around, things are constantly on fire, and that impacts that first impression that you have on your customer experience. So those are the make or break moments, and trust can be earned in seconds and lost in minutes. And so that's where your technical support team and even your customer success team is that frontline ambassador. A lot of times we get caught up in thinking, okay, the sales team is that frontline, but it's really across the whole organization that we're being those representatives. So to me, support isn't just about solving problems, it's really representing the entire company based off of its brand and its values in every interaction. And just kind of a question for you to think about. You can answer in the chat if you'd like. But how many of you have told either a friend, a neighbor, a colleague about a bad customer support experience that you've had almost instantly because you're just so frustrated in that moment? So transitioning, okay, what are you actually going to walk away and learn today? So the first thing I'll talk about is building a skills-driven support framework. Now, this framework I learned along the way, so I am not an expert in implementing this. There's a lot of lessons learned that I'm happy to share with you today. The second piece is about transforming support through a data-driven storytelling format. So I'll give you some different frameworks to think about how to tell stories effectively. Now, this isn't just for support teams, right? This could be applied to internal stakeholders. It could be applied to sales conversations that you're having with prospects or existing customers. And then lastly, we'll incorporate that framework and that storytelling with that data-driven approach into thinking about designing automation. And this is really the hot topic right now about AI. How do we leverage it, but do it in a way that's smart? So that way we're not feeling like we're replacing humans or making people feel like they're just talking to a robot. So with that, we'll dive into the current kind of landscape and support. So customer expectations, we can thank people like Amazon for this. We want instant resolutions. We want 24/7 access, and we want it now, and we want it faster than ever before. And this image says it all, right? That just ultimately leads to burnout if we don't have a way to have the team be supported, have a way to scale this, and have it be sustainable over time. And ultimately, the team feels this the most, and then it results in people leaving. And the paradox with all of this is, if you think about your internal tech stack, how many of you have more than a few tools, right, that you have access to, and a few meaning like more than 5, right? I think all of us could probably raise our hand that we have more than 5 tools. And when we start thinking about more and more tools, it just adds more and more complexity to the problem that we're trying to solve, which is that customer expectation. And then you have the business pressure, right? The executives at the table saying, okay, here's your target. You crushed it last year. We're going to keep increasing the goalpost, but we're not going to give you the same amount of resources. So you have to keep proving out that ROI with less. And a lot of times what we'll see, like I shared that story at the beginning, customers are frustrated, the team's overwhelmed, and then you're missing that opportunity to build that trust and that credibility with customers. So thinking about this skills matrix kind of revolution, right? So the traditional approach is we have our generic job role, right? And that serves what this role is intended to do. I apologize. My neighbors are getting some new roofing, so I'm just gonna go shut my door. Hopefully you can't hear my dog barking.
In the meantime, Sarah, I love your response, Joy, your response. With tech stacks, it's always like, what, 100, 200? Way too many, right? Go ahead, Bree.
Thanks, Michelle. And then a lot of the work is delegated kind of based on assumptions, based off of that job role. And then a lot of the training that I've seen is kind of a one size fits all, right? So you still build it for that role, but you're not thinking about that person's skill set when it comes down to their technical understanding, their soft skills, and any other factors that they might need to be supported to be successful. So with this skills matrix, you're starting to get more granular in that mapping. You're identifying those individual strengths, and you're having a targeted development plan. And that's where the team gets the most excited, because they start to feel empowered about what they can actually do to grow and progress their careers. So diving into this a little bit deeper, what's this framework? I like to keep it really simple with 4 things. So the first phase is around discovery and assessment. So what we did when we were building this out internally was we listed out, okay, what are all of our solutions, right? And then what are the different proficiency levels within those? So beginner, intermediate, advanced, subject matter expert. And we defined those proficiency levels. And that was kind of that key component of that first one, which is the technical skills. And that's usually the easiest thing to map out because you have all that information on hand. Then we started thinking about, okay, what are the soft skills that are really important to have? So for our service desk team, they need to be great active listeners because they're getting a ton of calls in, and they need to be able to triage and de-escalate those situations. And then they had certain specialized skills that they needed to know and understand. So that could look like, okay, maybe we just had a new feature get released and they need to be educated on that because it's something the sales team is starting to push. And then the last piece, what's their growth potential? So where do they actually want to go in the organization? And then what future openings might we have that could match that need? So we had each person, after we developed this matrix, and it was not anything fancy, it was just in a simple spreadsheet to get started, and each person map out, okay, where do they think they're actually sitting? And then they gave examples based off of their day-to-day work to kind of justify where they thought they were at. Then they had their manager do the same thing without them being able to see their individual results, do the same mapping. And then we had them come together and kind of do an analysis to understand, okay, how closely or how far off did we get with those mappings? And then we had them come to a conclusion and agree on what that mapping looked like. And then we took all of those mappings together for the entire team and plotted them on one chart or one matrix to see across the whole team, where did everybody sit? And then from there, that's where we started to develop more of a training plan and be able to identify really quickly, oh, it looks like we have these 3 people that are subject matter experts, and we have these 2 people that still feel like they're beginners. Maybe they've been here for a few years, so that's concerning because we want to make sure that they can keep progressing. So I'll pause there. Happy to dive into that a little bit further. The next piece is around kind of that matrix design. So like I said, we use a simple spreadsheet. There's lots of different tools that you can leverage out there to help you come up with a fancier matrix design. We initially started with just those technical skills because we have so many different products and solutions that we have to offer. That piece was a little overwhelming to try to include all the other areas. But you can get started kind of thinking about all these areas to begin with. Thinking about that gap analysis. So it's easy for us to just say, okay, we have this mapped out, we see these gaps, now what? And that's where we started to leverage those subject matter experts when thinking about the gaps and how to fill them and building out those specialized training plans. Is my dog barking really loud? Yes. Okay. I'm gonna just go grab him. I am so sorry. He is
No, you're fine. This, while you're doing that, while I'm off mute, I just got a bird. So if you hear tweeting or squawking, yeah, like that one, I don't know if you can hear that, but yeah, we love animals at the Enablement Squad. So another good reason to join. Back to you, Bree.
Yes, yeah. Winston is just gonna be with us, so that way he's not disrupting things. So then that gap analysis is where we started leveraging the subject matter experts, and we started mapping out the trainings really strategically. So that way we could have weekly sessions during our team meetings and have it really be led by each team member. Instead of just having a full curriculum built out and then trying to incorporate all of this for everybody. So that way it was really tailored to the individuals that needed that content the most. And then the last piece, tool that we recently purchased is Lattice. And Lattice has been amazing to be able to track all of these different areas and map this out. So they have a section in Lattice called Grow, and you can set different learning and development goals. And then you can correlate those back to your one-on-ones with your manager. So that piece has been really helpful because a lot of times it's hard to quantify all these little training efforts and measure that impact and correlate it back to that person's individual development path and how they're progressing. And then the other piece with Lattice is we actually leverage that for our performance reviews this year. So all that feedback that we're notating throughout the year in those conversations and individuals' growth plans, we can correlate that back to their performance review. And it's in a matter of a couple clicks that you can incorporate that. So that has been really fun to leverage that tool. So I'll talk through a couple real world application use cases, because sometimes these frameworks can be a little abstract until you sit down and think through some examples. So the first scenario I'll give is a complex technical issue. So we had somebody call in and they were trying to do something really complex. We have hardware in the courtrooms and we have software in the courtrooms, and they were trying to do something that was advanced. And so we immediately were able to identify with our service technician some quick discovery questions to ask based off of a checklist that we have internally. And then we were able to get the right resource to that problem pretty quickly because we had that skills matrix. So that person was then able to identify, okay, who on my team do I know is the SME in this area? And then we're able to triage it to that issue. So before we had that matrix in place, it was really hard to know who could even help. And we'd have to spend a lot of time trying to figure out who would be the best person. And so it ended up having longer resolution times. They'd have to have the customer be passed to lots of different individuals, and then they get more and more frustrated. And as the outcome of all of that, it started building more trust and credibility with our customers because we were able to get those faster response and resolution times. So the second scenario is training new hires. So with the support team, we have had an evolution of the team as far as its capacity continuing to grow. And so we had to figure out really quickly, how do we upskill and train the team to adapt with our solution? And when we're training new hires, it's been really great to see them initially start as a beginner in a lot of these areas. And then as they progress throughout their training and their tenure, be able to map it back to the matrix of how they've evolved in those proficiency levels. It also gives them a really tangible place to be able to track and measure, where are they actually sitting today? Where do they want to get to? And then how far did they come? The last scenario is that career development. So we actually have a team member that is going to be transitioning teams in the next couple of months. And the matrix is really helpful for us to have as a kind of leverage point and a conversation around, where do they want to be? Before having this matrix, the team really only felt like they could bring up career development conversations during performance reviews, and didn't feel like they had a place to discuss these things on a more regular basis. And so that's where the skills matrix came in really handy, because we are looking at it more frequently than annually. It gave the team an opportunity to express areas that they were interested in, but then also know who to go to learn more about those areas they were interested in. All right, I've been talking a lot. Michelle, I'm going to have you throw out the first poll with our question. All right, so I'm curious, for those of you, whether you work in support or not, what's your biggest support challenge right now? So the first one is inconsistent service quality, long resolution times, team skill gaps, or proving out ROI or the value.
All right, we got about half of you, a little more than half. Are you able to see these results, or is it just me?
I think it's just you, Michelle, so I'm going to rely on you.
Ooh, well, I can tell you, because I don't want to end it just yet, because we still have a few people who haven't voted, but it does look like, and I'm not that surprised at this, proving ROI and value is kind of creeping ahead here, followed by team skill gaps, which is
Perfect, yeah.
not surprising.
So it sounds like then this matrix, as far as those team skill gaps, will be a great tool to leverage, and then proving out the ROI and the value we'll get to when we're talking about our data telling story framework.
Yeah. Last 10 seconds, and then I'm ending it, you guys.
Get in your responses. Don't be shy.
There you go.
All right, here we go. Yeah, so majority, 40% proving out ROI value. Wonderful. So let's talk about that piece with the ROI. So how do we turn these numbers back into a narrative? So traditionally, support teams have reported out on ticket volume, response time, resolution rate, and those are usually what's in our service level agreement or our SLA. But when we're thinking about what internal stakeholders care about and what really impacts our customers, it's really the why and the impact rather than the what. And these things are a lot harder to measure. So a couple examples of things that relate back to that are the customer effort reduction. This is really important because as a customer, you don't want to have to put a lot of effort into solving your own problem. That's what you're paying for in having support. And so being able to have issues be resolved quickly without a lot of effort is really important. Prevention of escalations. So our support team For the Record does a service proactively. And I will say, for our customers that have that service, it's been invaluable because we actually find issues before the customer does. And that kind of blows customers' minds. Revenue impact of support quality. So we tie this back to the number of support leads, and we have a tracker for that internally. And then relationship building indicators. What does that mean? That's going back to that trust and credibility. So thinking about the number of customers that would be a reference are happy to speak up at a conference or partner with us on a webinar, those types of indicators. So how do you take a traditional metric and kind of turn it into the why and the impact? So I give an example below. So we closed 1,000 support tickets, let's say this last month. So instead of just saying that back to the leadership team or reporting out to a customer, you can say we prevented 1,000 potential customer defections. And so just kind of reframing it in that mindset with those words can really make a big difference as far as the perception of those statistics. All right, so the data storytelling framework, again, like to keep it simple with 4 things to remember: context setting, the journey, the impact, and the call to action. So the context setting is really important because without this, it can just kind of feel like, so what? So the couple things to keep in mind with this are, what is the business challenge that we're trying to solve? Why does this matter to the stakeholders? And what's at stake if they don't do anything and they just stay with the status quo? And trying to get answers around even just one of those questions can sometimes be a challenge, but getting an answer to all 3 will really make your story a lot more robust. Then when we're thinking about the journey, that's kind of the what and the how, right? So what actions did we take? What obstacles were overcome? And then as a result, how did the team adapt and improve as a result of that? And when we're thinking about the impact, that's where we're actually showing the quantifiable results, any qualitative improvements, and then thinking about any future risks and mitigations and how we're going to address those. And then most importantly, a good story doesn't really mean anything unless you have a call to action or an ending to it. So what's needed for continued success? How can stakeholders continue to support the team? And what does that next chapter of the story look like? So I'll give an example of this just based off of our support team. So one of our customers was experiencing a high volume of network outages, and we're not their network provider. And they were actually on one of our really old legacy solutions and had really old, outdated hardware. And this was problematic to the court because they were relying on these systems to uphold their public duty of capturing the official court record. And so without a court record, filing an appeal becomes much more difficult and can lead to a mistrial depending upon, state regulation. So what our support team started doing is we started tracking those network outages, and we did it based off of what courthouses and courtrooms were impacted. And that actually allowed them to improve their network infrastructure internally. But then it gave us a really good opening and an opportunity to talk about our new cloud-based solution and provided a roadmap of future recommendations. So a problem they were having, tons of outages, it was impacting our team because we were getting a ton of calls in. Our solution relies on them having internet. And then it turned into a sales opportunity, and they have a multi-million-dollar opportunity open right now. And so it was really cool to see that problem be turned into an opportunity. And the call to action that we left with the customer was that roadmap of them understanding how they can continue to grow and be supported by our team in the future. All right, so what's a template for this based off of that story that I just gave? So you can adapt this to your own metrics, own outcomes, and really emphasize this into a transformation narrative. So in that story I just gave, just to give you a little bit more context, those calls were making up 70% of the incoming calls that we had for that customer. So it was a huge percentage of them. And it was around 30% of all of their support tickets with us. And so that's why we started to evaluate and track that a little bit further. So starting out with this framework, the challenge, the escalation rate percentage. So that's one example, right, that you could give. And then it's costing us X dollars in senior resources and damaging customer relationships. So for that example I gave, right, we had a really high volume, and it was costing us a lot of money. Although I didn't quantify it in my story, it's something that I could easily calculate internally. So for this example that I gave, the solution would be, okay, how do we proactively identify these issues? And you could use the skills matrix to do that, to pair the right resource to the right problem at the right time. And then the result, and the example that I gave is that the escalation rate declined. We had a savings of X dollars annually, and then we ultimately saw an increase in customer satisfaction scores. So ultimately, by the end of the day, we were empowering our team to do the right thing with the right people, and it built that trust in those relationships. All right, so what are some metrics that you can tangibly start to think about today to start to tell stories using that template or framework? So there's 3 areas that I've identified. The first is around customer trust indicators. The next is really internally around team empowerment. And then last, but arguably most important, is those business impact measures. So thinking about the customer trust indicators, I won't talk through all of these in detail, just highlight a couple from each area. I think the one that's most interesting for customer trust indicators is this repeat contact reduction. So if we can have customers coming to support less, that's a win, whether it's because we're educating them on how to fix it themselves, or we're doing a proactive service to identify it before they do, then they're actually interacting with us less, but continuing to see the value that we're delivering. From a team empowerment standpoint, I want to highlight the confidence in handling complex issues. Confidence is so hard to measure and track, and it's one of the things that ultimately comes back to if somebody's feeling confident, they're more likely to handle the issue better, give a better customer experience. They're more likely to be able to train others on how they address that, whether it was with their soft and or hard skills. And then as the agent, right, they're going to be more satisfied and are going to be more likely to stay and continue to grow and develop with the company. These business impact measures, so these are the things that maybe the executive team or the board really cares about, because this is what comes down to the bottom line at the end of the day. From my perspective, our internal executive team really cares about the ability to continue to upsell and cross-sell. So we have, as the market leader, if I had to guess, anywhere between 60 to 70% of the market share. And because of that, it's so important to be able to continue to grow those customers and develop those relationships. So not all these metrics are created equally. You need to dig in and understand for your business, which of these areas is most important to your stakeholders. But these are some good examples for you to be able to identify. All right, so starting to think about automation. There's a lot of learnings from people that I've talked to within the industry of things that have gone well and things that haven't gone well. So some common mistakes that I've heard is they're just focused on a cost reduction, right? And they're not thinking about the customer experience, and they're just looking for some easy, quick wins. An example of this that we've seen in the industry, right, is one major software company announced they were going to replace their support team with an AI bot. They laid off thousands of people, and it negatively impacted their customer experience almost overnight. So not considering people when you're building out these workflows and implementing tech can be a really big pitfall. And at the end of the day, what you want to avoid is creating that barrier between the customer and the human that's interacting with them. It should feel like an extension or an enhancement, not a replacement. The other thing that I've heard is trying to use AI too broadly. So automating the wrong processes or just trying to throw it out at the organization. So I was just at an AI workshop last week, and one of the challenges that one of their AI consultants brought up was they bought a tool, they gave it to everybody, and they didn't have a plan, and they weren't seeing great usage and results. And they were trying to figure out, okay, how do we scale this? And then we had somebody else in the room say, well, we've actually had great success, but it's on a really small scale with one team within one department and had a really focused use case, but we don't know how to scale that to the rest of the organization. So a better way to approach this is to think about automating the mundane. So what are those high volume tasks that people are constantly doing all day long, and thinking about how to automate that? And then going back to how do we enhance those human interactions instead of trying to create those barriers? And this really comes back to that seamless handoff process. So understanding what your process is today, having that be mapped out clearly before you start adding in automation is really important. And then ultimately you want to measure this by the quality, not just the efficiency gains. It's really easy to say, okay, we saved everybody 10 minutes today, but what does that mean? What did they do with those 10 minutes? And was it a quality result as an outcome? So Michelle, I'll have you put in the next poll for us here. All right, skills gap awareness. Do you know your team's specific skill gaps? So is this something that you're tracking today systematically? Maybe you have some general ideas, no, but you think you should, or maybe you assume everybody has the same skills.
I'll keep this open for another 15, 20 seconds. So get your answers in, and then I'm going to end it. Okay,
All right, I'm
5
curious
seconds
to see the results.
All righty, here we go.
All right, so it sounds like some people have at least some general ideas, but you're not tracking it systematically. And I'm happy to share an example of that framework that I was talking about earlier, even with that Excel spreadsheet, if it would be a helpful starting point. And then before I move on, I'm gonna have you spin up the next poll, Michelle. All right, so stakeholder communication. So thinking back to that data-driven storytelling framework that I was just talking through, how well do you communicate? And this could be support value, but really just think about any kind of value to the leadership team. So is it excellent? They see our business impact clearly. Good, they understand most of our value. Fair, they see us as necessary overhead. Or poor, they only see us as a cost center. So a lot of times, in that traditional view, support is seen as that cost center.
All right, 5 more seconds. Anyone else want to get their vote in? All righty. Here are the results.
Oh, that's awesome. So it sounds like most of it's understood, but there's probably some tweaks or refinements that could be made. And I'm curious to just hear in the chat how people are communicating. So whether it's through a dashboard or a report, or maybe a scheduled meeting, would love to hear more about how people are communicating. All right. So digging back into the smart automation strategies and leading with this human first approach. So I like to think about this in kind of 3 different levels. So these can stack and build on top of one another. The first level is thinking about information acceleration. Really thinking about easy ways to build in automation. So this could be for support, smart routing based off of that skills matrix. So maybe you have some inbound rules that if something has a certain word, it triggers it to go to a certain team or to a certain person. It could be a dashboard for you to have that visibility, or it could even just be in your knowledge base, leveraging some automation there. And a lot of people are doing these things today. And so how do you bring it up to that next level of that process enhancement? So that's where you're starting to leverage templates. And you can build a template for really anything. But again, going back to the mundane, what are those high volume tasks that the team is doing? And then starting to think about what's the workflow that the team is doing. So that way you can really enhance that process. And then the most important piece of the process enhancement from my perspective is the QA. So that quality assurance automation. How are you actually seeing that you're getting the result that you intended to when you built that? And then the next level from there is getting to that proactive engagement state. So how are you tracking the success of the automation? So going back to that framework of what is the business outcome that you're seeking by putting this in place? What are those areas that you can continually improve over time? And is there anything that you're routinely checking proactively before you even get to that outcome? All right, so again, I have another framework for you to think through, keeping it nice and simple. So the first phase, just like we do in sales, let's do some discovery. So what are some things that you can do in that first phase of the assessment? So this is really mapping out what are those current workflows. So this is talking to the team to understand what's taking up the majority of their time. From there, then you can identify those automation opportunities and then start to do a little bit of a technical evaluation, what's needed to make those automation opportunities work, and then setting some success criteria. What does good look like if you build this out, and how are you going to measure that? Then the next piece is starting small. So like I mentioned, when I was at that AI workshop last week, they had great success when they did it in a really small controlled environment, and they had a clear understanding of what their business impact was. So I recommend starting something really low risk, but that has a high impact on your overall process. Start with a small subset of the team. So don't try to boil the ocean and have everybody do this. Start with some of the team members that are already comfortable with technology, and then gather feedback and then start to iterate from that. And measure those initial results so that way you can benchmark what the success of that pilot was and learn from that before you start to try to scale or replicate that in other small pockets of the business. Then the third piece of this is how do you integrate those skills, going back to that matrix, into the automation. So ultimately, you need to train the team on those automation tools and processes that you built out. And then you'll also want to update the skills matrix based off of those automation competencies that they'll need to learn to be able to leverage that. Other things that you might need to build out are developing new workflow procedures. So these could be just a simple SOP document, and creating some best practices. So that way, when you do have new hires join, it's really easy for them to be brought up to speed on how this works. And then when you're finally ready to fully deploy your solution and roll it out to the team, you'll want to be able to monitor some performance metrics and have ongoing support and training for the team. So that way you can keep optimizing it. And it's so important to give that training. A lot of organizations that I've talked to about AI are just giving these tools out, providing really minimal training, and are not seeing the results or the impact that they had hoped. And they don't have a great way to measure it, so they don't really know where the problem is or how to fix it. Last but not least, the evolution of all of this. So I think this part is my favorite, is to continue to iterate just from being in a sales enablement perspective. So how can we continue to enhance all of our automation opportunities? Are there any other areas of the business that we could integrate with? So this could be on a system level or even other departments that could benefit from this workflow and process. And then thinking about how to scale this. And this is really the challenge for a lot of people that I've been talking to in the industry, is the scaling and doing it in a smart way that's not too quickly or going to have a negative impact on their internal teams or the customers. All right, Michelle, I'll have you throw out our next poll. All right, current automation state. So where are you in your automation journey? I'm curious to see the responses on this. So advanced, we have smart automation working well. Really curious to see if we have any folks out in the audience there. I'm not quite there myself. Intermediate, we have some automation. Basic, we automate simple tasks only, or you're just starting and then there's little to no automation that you have at all, but maybe it's something you want to learn more about.
All right, 5 seconds. Get your vote in. This is an interesting one, Bree.
I feel like we need like a drum roll or something. I'm so eager. All right. Oh my goodness. Equally split across the board. So it looks like there's a lot of you that are still starting, and that's okay. There's a lot to learn, and it can be really overwhelming and even a little bit scary, right? Thinking about automation. Basic, that's great to see that there's some people that are starting to dabble. And then intermediate, you have some automation. So it sounds like everybody's on a different place in their automation journey. And I will say this is typical to what I've seen across the industry when talking to other people. Nobody that I've talked to has been in that advanced or expert category yet. And if they are, I almost kind of question them, right? Like, are you? Because I think there's so much more that we can continue to do with automation, and it keeps evolving every day. All right, so I'm going to dive into some more use cases because, again, I like to bring these back down to the ground instead of just talking about them in the abstract. So a challenge that we were facing internally is agents were spending so much time trying to find information to give to customers that you can see people were pulling their hair out, right? It was really frustrating and it was not a good use of their time. So one solution you could think about leveraging for this, and again, this doesn't have to apply to your support team, this can apply really to anybody, is using an AI-based knowledge base. And a lot of people have these set up, but they don't have it set up in a refined way or are regularly reviewing that content. And so making some simple tweaks to that can really help. So yes, there's going to be a reduction in research time and a faster resolution. And again, my question is, what is the team doing with that time that they're gaining? Are they able maybe to take a break for 5 minutes and refresh? Are they able to work on a more complex task? And so digging into what they're doing with that time, I think is what's really interesting as an outcome. All right, second use case, the challenge. So a lot of our customers were having reoccurring issues. And one way we started to address this was starting to do that proactive outreach. So our team started having some different ways that we could proactively evaluate what was happening in our customers' environments. And as a result, we ultimately saw less tickets come in, but ultimately customers were a lot happier. So instead of this feeling like customers are constantly waking up, walking on a bed of broken glass, they now had this cush bubble wrap under their feet, which gave them a lot better perception of the support team. And the last case I'll talk about is that skills router. So I kind of referenced this example earlier. We had a complex case come in and it was involved in multiple different solutions with different components. And because we had that checklist in place, they were able to use skill-based automation to figure out who to get the problem to really quickly. So we haven't automated this internally yet, but this would be one area that would be low-hanging fruit for us to automate. So again, our anticipated result would see a reduction in escalations. And then ultimately what our team's working towards improving is that first contact resolution. So can we resolve their issue with one person touching the case, or do we have to keep passing it to multiple people on the team? So this is a great place for you to kind of think about what are some use cases for your team and how you might want to apply automation in the future. So I like to provide an action plan because a lot of times all these things make sense in isolation, but they can be hard to string together. So when we're thinking about putting all of this in a timeline, starting with a foundation, and you can do this over a longer period of time. These are just suggested timelines. This is a marathon, not a sprint. So the first couple of weeks, maybe you start to conduct that team skills assessment. So understanding where is everybody's skill set, what are those gaps, and then analyzing what are your current support metrics that you're reporting out on. Do those still make sense to report out on, or is that something that should be reevaluated? And then identifying 3 automation opportunities. So again, these could be really simple things, but the team's spending a lot of time in them. And then once you have that base level understanding of what your current state is, moving into that skills matrix development. So starting that framework, thinking about individuals' development planning, and then establishing baseline measurements for each individual of what they want to achieve and how they want to grow. So I have some team members that they're very ambitious. They want to get to that next proficiency level within 60 to 90 days. Other team members are like, you know, I feel like this is probably going to take me 6 months, right? And everybody wants to grow and learn at a different pace. And so that gives us a great way to measure where those individual goals are at. Then when we start thinking about introducing automation, now that we have that strong foundation, we have that mapping of where everybody sits, that's where we can start to identify who would those people be that we want to bring into that pilot, start thinking about that as a project, training those team members on those new processes, rolling out that new process, and then starting to collect that feedback and iterate on it. Then a few months later, right now that the pilot has kicked off, how can we scale and optimize it? So what went well in the pilot, what didn't? How can we expand on those successful automations and maybe replicate that into other areas within the department? Maybe there's skills that need to be refined and we need to do some more supplemental training to get everybody up to the same speed. And then how can we develop a dashboard to start to track some of these measurements so that way we can see how these automations are all working together. And then lastly, just ongoing continuous improvement. So maybe you're reevaluating that skills matrix and updating it every quarter. Automation reviews, so understanding, is this automation working or not, and having a cadence basis to do that. I really want to call out how important it is to get customer feedback and integrate that into all of these things. So understanding what's the perception of customers. So going back to that trust accelerator idea, are we able to build that credibility? And then are there things with the team that they could actually expand on with their current capabilities? And maybe they can take on more because we've been able to bring everybody up to speed, leveraging that automation. All right, so measuring this trust accelerator, what are some ideas for different KPIs? So for trust metrics, and I'll just kind of talk through these at a high level. Happy to send these out if anybody's interested in getting more details on this after the webinar. But customer confidence scores. So are customers feeling confident based off of their interactions with the team? What's our first impression rating? So going back to that question I asked everybody at the beginning, how likely are you to tell somebody about a negative customer support experience? That first impression's made in seconds, not minutes. Escalation request rates. So overseeing the technical support team, that's something that I'm constantly aware of because I want to reduce the number of escalations that are coming across my desk. And then how many repeat customers are satisfied. So in support one day, somebody could absolutely love you and be shouting off the rooftops of how great you are. And then something could happen the next day and they're super frustrated with you. And so maintaining that level of consistency is super important to building that trust. Then when we're thinking about the capability metrics, so this is going back to internally thinking about the skills. So are people actually progressing from one proficiency level to the other? Are people getting stuck in one of those areas and digging into understanding the why behind that? Improving cross-training effectiveness. So something we do is a lot of shadowing when we get a live case come in, so people can use that as an opportunity. But if we notice certain people aren't leveraging those peer coaching opportunities, trying to understand what's preventing them or what barriers might be in place. And then overall, again, thinking about the agent's confidence levels, are they feeling comfortable and confident based off of the skills that they've learned? It's one thing to learn something and say you know it. It's another to feel really confident in talking about it and sharing that knowledge with others. The business impact. So this could be the cost per resolution. It could be the customer lifetime value correlation. This could be churn prevention. It could also be the revenue impact of support. So going back to what I said when I first joined the support team, things were not going well in support. Well, guess what? As a result, we weren't getting a lot of upsells from those customers because they were having that poor experience. So we can say that there was some type of correlation between the quality of support that we were getting and that improved annual recurring revenue that we started to see out of especially our major enterprise customers. And then lastly, automation effectiveness. So yes, there's going to be a time savings per agent, but what are they doing with that time? Thinking about the accuracy of that automation. I know that's one fear that a lot of people have is, okay, how accurate is this going to be? And so that's really important to be able to measure. And then thinking about the overall process efficiency gains. You spent all this time and energy building out this automation. Is it actually making things more efficient than they were before? And if you don't have a way to measure that, then it's hard to say that that automation was successful. All right, Michelle, have you put out, I think it's our last poll, right?
We've got
Oh, one more.
two left.
Two left, perfect, thank you. All right, so readiness assessment. So what's your biggest barrier to implementing these automation strategies today? So I know everybody's kind of across the board, whether you're kind of intermediate, just starting, or you haven't touched this at all. But if you have started to think about this, what's been your struggle? So budget, resources, leadership buy-in, maybe the team's resistant to change, or it's just the technical complexity of trying to wrap your head around all this.
All right, 5 seconds. And Bree, just as a time check, we're at the 5-minute mark.
Perfect.
All right, I'm gonna end the poll and let's see. These are surprising to me, actually. There you go.
Oh, interesting. Okay, so it sounds like there's a lot of fear, right, with the team being resistant to change. The technical complexity is also a showstopper. And it sounds like leadership buy-in really isn't something that a lot of people are struggling with, but some people are. But there's definitely the budget and the resources, right? Nobody's struggling with that. All right, so common pitfalls when I've talked to people into the industry and even myself, right, when we're thinking about how do we implement some of these things. So a few things to remember. Start with the humans first. That's most important. A lot of people get caught up in the technology and then focus on the people. So just flip that mindset. Over automating too quickly. So start with something really small, controlled. Then you can start to iterate on that versus trying to start with lots of areas. This piece I think is arguably the most important. So ignoring change management. So as enablers, we know how important it is to invest in training and communication. So don't let that frame of mind change when you're thinking about automation. From my perspective, we can measure activity all day long, but it's kind of the so what's the outcome of that? And then a lot of times people forget about the people, right? So what's the overall morale of the team and the customer sentiment? And check in and understand what that looks like. All right, so why this matters. So people are going to leave, right, if we don't do these things well, internally and externally. So externally, when we think about customers, more than half the people are just going to leave and they won't complain because they had a poor onboarding experience. And that starts with customer success and support. And then for people, once they've gone through their onboarding, right, and they have support, almost 90% of people will pay more to have a better support experience. So our customers are telling us they're not going to tell us when there's a problem, and they'll pay more to somebody else to get that better experience. So in wrapping up with all of this, here's your 3 takeaways as homework today of things that you can get started with right away. So the first one is assess your current state. So I encourage you to do this within the next week. Just understand what are those areas that the team maybe has gaps in and start mapping that out. Then within the next month, what's one quick win that you could have when it comes to implementation around automation? And then within the next 60 days, how are you going to actually implement that and start to plan building out that trust, whether it's internally, externally, or both? I know we're coming up hot on time, so we can skip that last poll question and I'll open it up to any questions.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Bree. So we have 2 minutes. If anybody wants to come off mute and ask Bree any questions, you are welcome to do so. You can also raise your hand if you want, and I can unmute you as well. I'll give you just a second. gather your thoughts. Any questions? Any comments? There is a question in the chat. Yes, the recording is going to be shared. No worries if you came late. I know quite a few of you came a little bit late. Yes, we have the recording. We will make it available. Let's see. And oh, we just have it. That Allie, thank you. So Allie is at Recharge. She said that this is really relevant to the team. So awesome. Another, this was super helpful. Sounds like we have just a bunch of compliments instead of questions, Brie.
Well, if you think of any questions or want to see any examples of templates that we've used internally, would love to connect with you on LinkedIn and have a one-on-one conversation, always open to that. So thank you so much for being engaged in our conversation today and looking forward to connecting with you.
Awesome. Bree, thank you so much for joining us. Everybody, thank you for taking time out of your day. Again, there's a survey at the end. If you can just take that, let us know how we're doing. In the meantime, have a wonderful rest of your day and a lovely weekend. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.